The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the sprawling estate. The air was thick with tension, a strange mix of calm and anticipation, as if the land itself knew something was about to happen. A wild horse, powerful and untamed, pawed the ground in the corner of the stable, its dark eyes flashing with a mix of fear and defiance. This was no ordinary horse. He had been rejected, dismissed, even mocked by everyone who had tried to tame him. And tonight, his story was about to collide with a young stable boy who carried more courage than his years suggested. The stable boy, Thomas, was no stranger to hard work. His hands were calloused, his back bent from long days cleaning stalls and grooming horses, yet there was an undeniable gentleness in the way he moved around the animals. Thomas had been humiliated countless times by his employer, a rich man named Mr. Hawthorne, whose wealth had made him cruel and careless. Just yesterday, Thomas had been scolded for a mistake he hadn't even made. Spilled oats, cracked saddle, something trivial that Mr. Hawthorne had turned into a spectacle of embarrassment. Thomas had smiled politely, nodded, and endured the insult in silence. But tonight, the world of the stable was about to shift, and the horse, the same one that everyone else had called untamable, would teach them both lessons they would never forget. The horse's name was Shadow, a fitting name for a creature that seemed to belong to the night itself. His mane was as black as midnight, his muscles rippling under smooth, glossy fur that reflected the dim light in the stable. Shadow had been bought for an exorbitant sum, a prize for someone who wanted prestige over connection. And yet, he refused to submit to anyone's control, shaking off riders, bucking trainers, and making a mockery of all who tried to tame him. Many had walked away defeated, their pride wounded, whispering that Shadow was impossible. As Thomas approached, he felt the familiar surge of nervous excitement. He knew better than to rush, better than to force, yet every fiber of his being wanted to reach out, to earn the horse's trust. Shadow's ears twitched, nostrils flaring as he studied the boy. In that moment, the air was thick with unspoken challenges, the unyielding will of a wild animal meeting the quiet determination of a young human. Thomas took a slow breath, remembering something his father had once told him: patience wins battles that strength cannot. Meanwhile, Mr. Hawthorne leaned against the wooden railing of the upper loft, a smug smile playing on his lips. He didn't see potential, only failure. "Mark my words," he called down, his voice dripping with arrogance. "That horse will break every person who tries to ride him. You, Thomas, are just another pawn in his games." The words stung, but Thomas ignored them. He had learned long ago that Mr. Hawthorne's confidence was inversely proportional to his kindness. Thomas slowly closed the distance, carrying only a halter and a lead rope. No fancy equipment, no tools meant to assert dominance. Shadow shifted, muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. The stable boy's heart pounded as he extended a hand, letting his fingers brush against the horse's muzzle. There was tension, electric and raw, a silent test. Shadow's eyes narrowed, measuring Thomas, weighing him, almost as if he were deciding whether to trust the intrusion into his world. Then, as suddenly as it began, Shadow reared back, ears pinned, a snort of warning escaping his flared nostrils. Thomas froze, every instinct screaming to retreat, yet he didn't. He knew fear could become control, and he had come tonight not to dominate but to connect. Slowly, he lowered his hand, whispering softly, words barely audible, "I won't hurt you. I just want to understand." For a moment, the stable was quiet except for the low hum of the evening wind and the distant call of a barn owl. Then came the first breakthrough. Shadow shifted his weight forward, lowering his head just slightly. A subtle victory, unnoticed by Mr. Hawthorne, who had already started pacing upstairs, muttering about wasted time and lost money. Thomas felt a surge of hope. The horse wasn't submissive, but he wasn't rejecting him either. That was the fine line he needed to tread, between fear and trust. Hours passed like minutes. Thomas moved carefully, mimicking Shadow's own slow, deliberate motions. He mirrored the horse's breathing, his posture, even the subtle tension in his legs. This wasn't about control, it was about empathy. Shadow's eyes softened, nostrils flaring less violently. He allowed Thomas to brush along his neck, a tentative gesture, almost like testing the waters of a fragile friendship. Then came the first real test. A gust of wind rattled the stable door, sending a shower of dust into the air. Shadow bolted sideways, hooves scraping the floor, a flash of panic in his eyes. Thomas's heart leaped, but he didn't move. Instead, he planted his feet firmly, whispered reassurance, and waited. Shadow circled, muscles taut like coiled wire, and then, miraculously, slowed. Step by step, he returned to Thomas's side, allowing the halter to be gently slid over his head. The first tangible sign of trust had been earned, and Thomas's chest swelled with quiet triumph. Mr. Hawthorne, watching from above, scoffed. "It's a fluke," he muttered. "A lucky boy with an undisciplined horse. Nothing more." But he couldn't deny the subtle change in Shadow's demeanor, the way the muscles under his sleek black coat relaxed slightly, the way his tail flicked less nervously. Something was happening, something that neither money nor authority could buy. As night fell completely and lanterns cast a warm glow over the stable, Thomas led Shadow outside, onto the dew-covered paddock. The horse pawed the ground but didn't bolt. For the first time in months, he seemed to consider the possibility that someone might actually care. And in that moment, Thomas realized something profound. Shadow wasn't broken, and he wasn't untamable, he was misunderstood. The stage was set for a bond that neither wealth nor arrogance could shatter, a connection forged through patience, empathy, and quiet determination. But little did Thomas know, Mr. Hawthorne's cruelty and pride were about to escalate in ways that would test not just Shadow, but the boy's courage, ingenuity, and heart. The first chapter of this story was only the beginning, and the night held secrets and challenges that would push them all to the edge. The night was deep now, a velvet cloak sprinkled with stars. The paddock was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional whistle of wind. Thomas led Shadow slowly around the enclosure, letting the horses' hooves sink into the damp earth, feeling the rhythm of each cautious step. The boy's heart raced, not from fear, but anticipation. Every inch of progress with Shadow felt monumental, like unlocking a secret code that no one else could see. But in the shadows above, Mr. Hawthorne's patience was thinning. From the balcony of the mansion, he glared down at the stable. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked. His voice carried across the cool night, startling Shadow, who jerked sideways. Thomas steadied him immediately, murmuring softly, it's okay, I'm here." Yet the subtle tension in the horse's neck was unmistakable. Mr. Hawthorne's interference was more than words, it was a challenge, a provocation. Earlier that day, Thomas had overheard Hawthorne boast to his guests, "I've spent a fortune on that beast. His mind to control. No boy or stable hand will ever tame him." The words had stung, but tonight, they fueled Thomas with quiet determination. He knew that true mastery wouldn't come from money, authority, or fear, it would come from trust, patience, and courage. And somehow, he believed he could reach Shadow where no one else had. Thomas guided Shadow toward a wooden jump at the far end of the paddock, a test that the horse had refused countless times. Shadow's ears flattened, nostrils flaring as he regarded the obstacle like it was a wall of stone. "You don't have to do this yet," Thomas whispered, crouching low and lowering his center of gravity to make himself smaller, less threatening. He extended his hand, palm open, and waited. For a moment, the tension was almost unbearable, the kind of pause that feels stretched into eternity. Then, as if reading Thomas's intent, Shadow inched forward, one careful hoof at a time. Thomas mirrored every movement, matching the horse's rhythm, never forcing, never pulling. He felt sweat bead on his forehead, muscles taut, every nerve alert. The jump seemed insignificant to an outsider, yet for Thomas and Shadow, it was a monumental test of mutual trust. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the nearby barn. A stack of feed bags had toppled over, spilling oats and hay onto the floor. Shadow bolted, hooves scrabbling on the damp grass, ears pinned back in terror. Thomas's heart leapt into his throat. He ran, keeping pace with the horse, speaking in soft, steady tones. You're safe. Slowly, painstakingly, he slowed Shadow's frantic pace. Step by step, the powerful black stallion returned to his side. When Thomas finally slid the halter back over Shadow's head, a subtle bond had deepened. Shadow's eyes no longer darted in panic, they lingered on Thomas, a flicker of recognition, a glimmer of trust. Mr. Hawthorne's laughter rang down from the balcony. "A lucky boy with a frightened horse," he sneered. "Do you really think you're breaking him? He'll crush you the first time you misstep." But Thomas didn't answer. He had learned long ago that words from a man like Hawthorne were designed to intimidate, not enlighten. What mattered now was the connection he was forging with Shadow, a bond built on patience, understanding, and the courage to face fear together. The night stretched on, filled with small victories and subtle setbacks. Thomas experimented with gentle nudges, letting Shadow test boundaries, then rewarding compliance with calm words and a soft touch. The horse's eyes shifted from wary to curious, muscles relaxing in ways that none of the previous trainers had achieved. Thomas marveled at the animal's intelligence, the way Shadow seemed to assess intent, reading his body language with precision. Every step was a conversation, every gesture a silent negotiation between two beings from different worlds. Yet danger lurked beneath the calm surface. Shadow was still a wild force, capable of sudden panic. A distant howl from a coyote startled him, and he spun, hooves clattering against the wooden fence. Thomas held firm, heart racing, voice steady, willing the horse to trust him. "It's just the wind. Just the night. You're safe." Slowly, the tension eased. Shadow lowered his head, nudging Thomas gently as if acknowledging his guidance. The moment was small, almost invisible, but monumental in its significance. Then came the next test, a stranger approaching the paddock. It was a neighbor, unaware of the late-night training. Shadow's ears flicked, nostrils flaring. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility press down on him. One wrong move could spook the horse entirely, undoing hours of painstaking work. But instead of panicking, Thomas stepped between the horse and the intruder, keeping his body low, calm, and deliberate. Shadow watched him, hesitant, then allowed Thomas to guide him past the fence without incident. The silent trust between boy and horse had passed another test. Mr. Hawthorne, growing increasingly impatient and angry, stormed down the stairs. "That's enough. You're making a fool of yourself, and of me." His tone was sharp, threatening, designed to provoke. He grabbed a riding crop from the tack room and stepped toward Shadow, intending to assert dominance the old-fashioned way. But before he could make contact, Shadow's eyes flashed with defiance, ears back, muscles coiled. The stallion stamped, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. For the first time, Mr. Hawthorne realized that no amount of wealth or authority could force compliance from this magnificent creature. Thomas stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Shadow's neck. "He's not yours to command," he said quietly, so only Hawthorne could hear. "Trust isn't bought. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned." The words were simple, but in them was an undeniable truth that cut through Hawthorne's arrogance. Shadow shifted closer to Thomas, the bond between them palpable in the crisp night air. As Thomas led Shadow back toward the barn, the rich man was left standing in the moonlight, realizing that his obsession with control had blinded him to the true essence of the horse. Shadow had not been tamed by punishment or fear. He had been reached by patience, courage, and empathy, the qualities Hawthorne had never understood. In that quiet, charged moment, Thomas felt a swell of pride, not from conquering the horse, but from being trusted by him. Shadow's eyes met his, a deep, almost human understanding passing between them. For the first time, the boy realized that the greatest victories often come not from force, but from connection. And yet, the night was far from over. A storm was brewing on the horizon, dark clouds rolling in, wind picking up with a hiss of distant thunder. Shadow sensed it, pawing the ground anxiously. Thomas knew that the coming challenges would test them in ways even this night had not. But for now, he allowed himself a moment to savor the subtle victory, the first true signs of trust in a horse the world had written off as untamable. If this story has moved you so far, go ahead and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe. Shadow and Thomas's journey is just beginning, and the trials to come will test every ounce of their courage. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon, low and menacing, vibrating through the ground and up into Thomas's chest. Shadow flinched, ears flicking back, nostrils flaring with raw instinct. The wind picked up, whipping his mane into a wild frenzy. The sky was a roiling canvas of grey and black, clouds swirling like the fury of an unseen hand. Every horse in the stable had begun to grow restless, stamping, snorting, their instinct screaming that danger was near. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. This was no ordinary evening, no simple test of patience. The storm was nature itself challenging him, Shadow, and even the arrogance of Mr. Hawthorne. He gripped the lead rope tightly, careful not to tighten too much, careful not to convey fear, and whispered, "Stay with me, Shadow, stay with me." His voice, calm and steady, was the anchor amidst the chaos. Shadow's eyes darted across the paddock, muscles taut and trembling like a drawn bowstring. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, revealing the immense power of the horse's physique, the way his coat gleamed like wet obsidian. The stallion snorted, tossing his head violently, almost as if testing Thomas's resolve. The boy's heart pounded, each beat a drum of fear and exhilaration. The next few minutes would determine not just trust, but survival. Suddenly, a branch from the nearby oak snapped under the force of the wind, hurtling toward Shadow with alarming speed. Instinctively, the horse bolted sideways, hooves pounding against the muddy ground. Thomas held tight, letting the horse run while keeping his voice soft. "It's okay, you're safe, it's okay." Every step was a negotiation, every movement a delicate balance between fear and trust. From the balcony, Mr. Hawthorne's voice cut through the storm. "Stop that foolish boy," he shouted, drenched in arrogance and disbelief. "That horse will kill you if you don't control him." But Thomas had learned that authority alone was powerless here. Control was not the answer. Connection was. He adjusted his pace, mirrored Shadow's movements, softening every step to show the horse he was not a threat. Shadow's ears flicked toward him, uncertainty mixing with cautious curiosity. A sudden crack of thunder closer than before sent Shadow rearing violently, front hooves slamming into the soft earth. Thomas's body tensed, but he held his ground, bracing for impact, whispering again, "I'm here. I won't let you fall." And then it happened. Shadow froze mid-motion, his chest heaving, eyes wide but scanning Thomas for guidance. The horse had a choice, panic or trust. And in that split second, he chose to stay. Thomas felt a surge of awe and relief. He reached up carefully, stroking Shadow's damp neck, letting him feel the steady rhythm of a human heart in sync with his own. The storm raged around them, but a quiet bubble formed between boy and horse, a silent pact of mutual respect and reliance. For Thomas, it was more than a victory, it was a revelation. He understood, finally, that fear could be faced head-on when met with empathy, calmness, and unwavering presence. Yet the storm was relentless. Lightning illuminated a gate that had been left unsecured, swinging wildly in the wind. Shadow's muscles coiled, the stallion's instinct screaming to bolt, to run, to escape. Thomas tightened his grip just enough to guide, not restrain. "Easy, easy, we'll get through this together," he murmured, using every ounce of patience he had cultivated over months of small victories. The night's challenge intensified when a loud crack split the air. A fence post had given way under the wind's force, creating an open path to the nearby woods. Shadow's instinct screamed freedom, but Thomas stayed close, walking backward slowly, keeping his body aligned with the horse's rhythm. Step by careful step, he led Shadow away from danger, coaxing him with gentle touches and soft reassurances. Every inch was a negotiation, every movement a delicate dialogue of trust. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the relative safety of the stable's inner yard. Shadow trembled, nostrils flaring, but he didn't bolt again. Thomas knelt, resting his forehead against the horse's shoulder, feeling the rapid heartbeat of life beneath his hand. You're okay," he whispered, a mixture of relief and pride flooding him. Shadow exhaled, a long, trembling breath, and nudged Thomas gently, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had solidified under extreme pressure. From above, Mr. Hawthorne watched in disbelief. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions, frustration, awe, and the sting of a lesson he had never anticipated. Shadow had not been forced or broken. He had chosen, in the face of fear and chaos, to trust the boy. Hawthorne's arrogance, his belief that wealth and dominance could bend nature, had been completely dismantled in the span of a single storm. Thomas led Shadow into the shelter, drying him with coarse towels, murmuring words of comfort. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was a fragile sense of peace. The horse no longer flinched at every shadow, no longer reacted with panic. Instead, he moved with cautious awareness, aware that someone was there who truly understood him. In those quiet moments, Thomas reflected on everything he had endured: the humiliation, the long hours of unappreciated labor, the sneers of Mr. Hawthorne. And yet, all of it had led to this: proof that courage, empathy, and patience could forge connections that no amount of money, authority, or force could replicate. Shadow's trust was not a gift lightly given. It was a testament to perseverance, compassion, and unwavering resolve. The storm eventually began to subside, leaving a damp, glistening world in its wake. Rain dripped from the roof, pooling in the corners of the stable, but the air carried a sense of renewal, as though the night itself had washed away fear and doubt. Thomas stood back for a moment, gazing at Shadow, whose eyes held a quiet wisdom, a depth of understanding that words could not capture. In that glance, the boy felt an unspoken promise. They would face challenges together, no matter what lay ahead. And as Thomas straightened, a subtle smile tugging at his lips, he noticed Mr. Hawthorne standing silently at the edge of the yard, drenched and humbled. The rich man's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was no arrogance, no sneer, only the recognition of something greater than wealth or power. The bond between a human and a horse, forged in trust, fear, and triumph. The storm had passed, leaving the estate drenched in glistening rain, the scent of wet earth and hay filling the air. Moonlight filtered through clouds, casting a silver glow over the paddock. Thomas led Shadow slowly back toward the stables, careful to keep the horse calm and steady. Every step felt deliberate, almost sacred, as if the night had been a trial meant to test more than just courage. It had tested character, patience, and heart. Inside the stable, Shadow shook off water, his dark coat gleaming in the lantern light. Thomas carefully brushed the rain from his manner, each stroke a silent reassurance that danger was gone and safety had returned. Yet the young boy knew that the real test wasn't just surviving the storm, it was what came next. Mr. Hawthorne's pride had been wounded, and the rich man's temper was as unpredictable as Shadow's wild instincts. As Thomas hung the tack to dry, Hawthorne's footsteps echoed behind him. The man's face was a mixture of frustration and curiosity. For the first time, Thomas noticed a flicker of doubt in the rich man's eyes, an unfamiliar vulnerability that hadn't existed before. Hawthorne cleared his throat. I didn't think it was possible," he admitted, voice low and reluctant. "I've spent fortunes on trainers, on techniques, and yet, that horse responded to you." Thomas paused, letting the words sink in, but he didn't gloat. He had learned long ago that humility carried more weight than pride. "It's not about techniques or money," Thomas said quietly. "It's about listening, understanding, patience. Shadow isn't broken, and he isn't untamable. He's just himself." Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably, not used to hearing anyone speak with such quiet authority. He had built his life on control, over money, over property, over people, and now he faced the undeniable truth that some forces could not be bent by wealth or dominance. The realization stung, but it was also illuminating. Hawthorne had spent so long trying to dominate others, he had forgotten to see, to feel, to understand. The next morning brought clarity, but also unexpected complications. Shadow was calm, almost serene, but Thomas noticed subtle signs of tension. The way his ears twitched at distant sounds, the occasional stamp of his hooves. He realized that trust, once earned, was not permanent. It required ongoing care and vigilance. Thomas spent hours walking with Shadow, teaching him new cues, allowing him freedom to explore within safe bounds. Each step was an affirmation of the bond they had forged during the storm, a bond built on empathy and courage. Meanwhile, Hawthorne observed silently, struggling with conflicting emotions. There was pride, yes, but also a gnawing unease. The rich man realized that his entire approach to life, his reliance on power, wealth, and intimidation, had been insufficient in understanding the creatures around him. Shadow had become a mirror, reflecting Hawthorne's arrogance, impatience, and ignorance. And the more he watched Thomas interact with the horse, the more Hawthorne questioned not just his methods, but himself. Days passed, and small victories turned into a rhythm of trust and companionship. Shadow began to respond to gentle cues, moving gracefully under Thomas's guidance. Yet Hawthorne still doubted, until the unexpected twist arrived. One afternoon, a guest arrived at the estate, a wealthy horse breeder interested in acquiring rare and powerful horses. Hawthorne, eager to impress and profit, immediately led the visitor to Shadow, expecting to showcase the animal's obedience under his command. But Shadow had other plans. As soon as Hawthorne approached, the stallion tensed, ears back, muscles coiled, and refused to move. The visitor raised an eyebrow, confused, while Hawthorne's face flushed with anger. "Go on, boy," Hawthorne barked at Thomas, expecting him to fail. But Thomas stepped forward calmly, voice soft, confident, filled with empathy. He extended a hand, spoke in low tones, and Shadow moved willingly, following Thomas's gentle guidance. The breeder's eyes widened. This is extraordinary," he said. "Most horses of this caliber require dominance, not trust. This is rare, remarkable." Hawthorne, standing there, was humiliated, not publicly, but deeply, personally. He realized that all his wealth and authority had been meaningless in the face of connection, patience, and genuine understanding. Shadow had made him confront the truth he had long avoided. Control is hollow without respect. But the surprises weren't over. That evening, Thomas discovered an old notebook tucked away in the corner of the tack room. It belonged to the previous caretaker of Shadow, a man who had trained horses with intuition and empathy rather than force. The pages were filled with detailed observations about Shadow's behavior, quirks, and fears. Reading them, Thomas understood why the horse had resisted every trainer before him. Shadow was sensitive, intelligent, and proud, and every failed attempt had chipped away at his trust. Thomas realized that the bond he had created was not a miracle. It was the culmination of understanding and perseverance. Shadow had been waiting for someone who could meet him on equal terms, who could listen without judgment, and who could act without arrogance. And in that realization, Thomas felt not only pride but a deep responsibility. To nurture this trust, to honor it, and to never take it for granted. Hawthorne, meanwhile, had retreated to his study, brooding over the events. The man had lost face, yes, but more importantly, he had glimpsed a truth he could not ignore. He realized that wealth and intimidation could never replace empathy, understanding, or patience. Shadow had taught him an invaluable lesson, whether he admitted it or not, that the greatest power lies not in force, but in connection. As night fell, Thomas and Shadow stood in the paddock once more, the moonlight illuminating the sleek black coat of the stallion. Thomas reached out, gently resting a hand on Shadow's neck, feeling the quiet strength beneath his fingers. Shadow nudged him in return, a subtle gesture of trust and companionship. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained, echoing in every heartbeat, every breath, every careful step they took together. The morning sun broke through a sky washed clean by the storm, casting a warm glow over the estate. The air smelled of wet earth, fresh hay, and hope, a tangible sense that something had shifted in the world. Thomas led Shadow out to the paddock, the stallion's hooves sinking gently into the soft, damp ground. Every movement was deliberate, every glance exchanged a conversation without words. The bond they had forged in fear, storm, and trust was unbreakable now, a connection that had grown stronger than anyone, even Mr. Hawthorne, could imagine. Shadow paused at the fence, nostrils flaring as he looked toward the mansion. Thomas sensed a flicker of anxiety, an echo of the past, of all the trainers who had tried and failed. He rested a hand gently on the horse's neck. "It's just us now," he whispered. "No one else matters. You can trust me." The stallion's ears twitched, then slowly tilted forward. He had learned what Thomas already knew. True safety and courage come from connection, not force. Inside, Mr. Hawthorne watched from the balcony, silent this time. The arrogance had melted into a quiet, reluctant awe. He had tried to control Shadow with money, intimidation, and authority, and had failed at every turn. Now, he was witnessing something far greater than obedience. Genuine trust, earned through patience, empathy, and courage. For the first time, he understood that mastery over another being was not measured in submission, but in respect and understanding. Thomas climbed onto Shadow's back, taking care not to rush. Every muscle in the horse's body rippled under him, alert but calm, a powerful creature now at peace with the boy. He had no saddle, no reins, just mutual understanding and trust. Thomas's heart pounded with a mix of excitement and reverence. "Ready?" he asked softly. Shadow responded with a gentle nudge, acknowledging the partnership. They began to move, first slowly, then with more confidence, circling the paddock. Each step was a testament to the months of work, the long hours of small victories, and the unwavering patience that had built this connection. Thomas felt a swell of pride, not in conquering, but in being trusted. Shadow's manner flowed like liquid night in the sunlight, his movements fluid and powerful, a living testament to the beauty of freedom partnered with respect. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the jump. A wide wooden obstacle, once an insurmountable barrier, stood silently in the center of the paddock. Shadow paused, muscles coiled like a spring. Thomas leaned forward, whispering encouragement, letting the horse feel his calm confidence. Shadow hesitated for only a heartbeat, then surged forward, powerful and graceful, clearing the jump effortlessly. The movement was poetry in motion, a breathtaking display of strength and trust. The brief silence that followed was electric. Even Mr. Hawthorne could not suppress a gasp of admiration. The horse, once deemed untamable, had chosen willingly to follow, to leap, to trust. Thomas slid off Shadow's back, resting a hand on the stallion's neck. "We did it," he murmured, awe in his voice. Shadow nuzzled him in return, a simple gesture with profound meaning, acknowledgement, respect, and companionship. Hawthorne approached slowly, his pride still intact but tempered by humility. I misjudged both of you," he admitted, voice low. "I thought control was everything. I see now. I was wrong. That horse isn't yours to command. Yours to understand." Thomas nodded, accepting the acknowledgement but not needing praise. The true reward had already been earned, the unspoken bond between human and horse, forged through empathy, courage, and patience. In the days that followed, Shadow became the pride of the estate, not for his obedience to wealth or authority, but for the partnership he shared with Thomas. Hawthorne, though humbled, learned to respect the power of connection over control, patience over haste, and understanding over arrogance. Visitors marveled at the sight, a young boy guiding a magnificent stallion with nothing but trust, patience, and quiet confidence. Thomas's life had changed too. Once humiliated, overlooked, and underestimated, he had discovered his own strength, not in power or wealth, but in courage, empathy, and perseverance. Shadow had trusted him when no one else could, teaching him that respect must be earned, not demanded, and that true partnership could transcend fear, chaos, and doubt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas sat beside Shadow in the paddock, brushing his coat with slow, deliberate strokes. The horse's muscles relaxed under his touch, his head resting gently against Thomas's shoulder. Around them, the estate was quiet, bathed in golden light, a sanctuary forged from trust, patience, and shared courage. Thomas whispered softly, almost to himself, "You were never untamable, just waiting for someone to see you." Shadow exhaled, a gentle, almost human sigh, as if in agreement. The story of Thomas and Shadow spread quietly at first, through whispers among the staff, then through visitors, until it became legend. Not because of a horse tamed or a boy victorious, but because it spoke to something deeper, the power of patience, empathy, and understanding in a world too often dominated by pride, fear, and arrogance. People marveled not just at Shadow's skill, but at the extraordinary bond that had been forged in the face of adversity and chaos. And though the rich man had been humbled, he too learned a lesson he would never forget. Control is fleeting, but respect lasts a lifetime. Force may bend a will temporarily, but trust transforms it permanently. Shadow, the horse once labeled impossible, had changed all of them, not through fear, but through quiet power, intelligence, and heart. As Thomas led Shadow back to the stable one final time that evening, lanterns casting warm pools of light on the wet ground, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time, he understood that true victory was not measured in obedience or wealth, but in the invisible threads of trust and courage that bind hearts together, human and animal alike. Shadow's eyes met his, calm, intelligent, and filled with a depth of emotion words could not capture. In that glance, Thomas saw everything he had hoped for, a friend, a teacher, a partner for life. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thomas and Shadow's journey shows that patience, trust, and courage can overcome any obstacle. Sometimes the most powerful bonds are built not through force, but through understanding. Share this with someone who believes in the magic of connection.